so much for coming on and joining us today so that we can learn from you. You have such a wealth of knowledge, and I want to talk about like the institute that you run and all these various things. But the number one question I was thinking of this morning to ask you is, what is leadership? Because I know we're going to be talking a lot about leadership. What is leadership? It's kind of hard to define.
You know, it's interesting that you asked that because even in our book, we talk about the difference between leadership and coaching. And the way I like to view it, so I will answer your question directly. And I'm trying to think of the technical definition that we have in our head that we've come up with. But I like the term coach better than lead, because I can be in a follower role but have great leadership traits or behaviors. And when it comes to just leading, so when it comes to coaching, the one of the differences being coaches have to have a person or a team of people that are accountable for achieving an objective. And the coach's then responsibility, and I'll just kind of put it generically, is to help people get to a place they could not have gotten to or achieved without that coach in their life. From a technical standpoint, it requires, and our research would show, it involves relationship, order, and the ability to create complex environments. And said a little differently, relationships, everybody gets. Order, think of that as people that develop systems and processes and tools that drive predictable outcomes. And complexity is kind of a fancy way of either describing it as change or challenge. All three are C words. But it's getting people into a state of discomfort in a healthy way, because growth only occurs when in that state. And often that's an overlooked trait of people, both whether they're in the business world or the world of sports or the world of education. So long answer to a short question, Clint.
No, I think it's the perfect answer, because it's a difficult answer for, I think, anyone. And I think everybody has different definitions of the term leadership, what it means to be a leader, who is a good leader, those types of things. And I like this idea that you've put forward, where leaders are actually coaches. They're trying to get the most out of employees or whoever it is that they may be leading. You said something really interesting there. You said the goal is to try to get someone into a state of discomfort. How do you do that in 2023?
Oh, wow. Oh, this is fun. Well, first of all, let me take a step back. And it's why your first question was so important, because if you can't define it, you can't measure it, you can't quantify it. And that's why I think it's so critical to really understand what it means to lead or what it means to coach. Because if you can define it, then you should be able to measure it. So one of those measurable characteristics that question you asked here is about challenge or creating discomfort. People, I don't think it's any more difficult in 2023. I think what we've discovered is there has to be a process to it, meaning that I can't, without creating a trust-based connection, without creating in a psychologically safe environment, I haven't earned the right to push you. I haven't earned the right to challenge you. I haven't earned the right to make you uncomfortable, because chances are I probably don't even know what does that or doesn't do that. So that's why it's so important to have those as the foundations, connections in psychologically safe environments. When that's in place, people want to be challenged. Our research, whether you're students in a classroom, an athlete in a gym, or somebody who's on a team at work, they want to be challenged. People don't want to be bored. People want to be pushed. They just want it done in a healthy way. And when I say healthy, for example, fear can create discomfort, but it's not healthy.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Fear can create discomfort, but it's not healthy. I wonder, as you think about leadership and kind of what you teach at Ecsell Institute, who like what is a typical like coaching session with you like? What are the kind of the main principles you're trying to teach someone? Basically, like get out of your comfort zone and get uncomfortable, or how would it work?
Well, really good question. There are so what we do. The first thing we have to do is really it's like going into a doctor. You know, it's funny. People when they decide they really want to make an investment in leadership development or coaching, whatever that, however they want to term it. It's kind of like going to a doctor and saying, "Hey, you know, I have a headache. How much is it going to cost me? How do I fix it?" And the responsibility, and it'll be somewhere between an aspirin and brain surgery. But the first thing that one has to have happen is there has to be a diagnosis, and that's why we work too. And the only way to accurately assess leadership effectiveness or coaching effectiveness is to go to the people who are being coached or who are being led. And through their eyes, you want to assess how they interpret that dynamic between coach and coachee, or boss employee, however you want to term it.
Mhm.
Then when that's understood, and there are 6 primary themes we measure, and they're in those 3 primary categories. So within a relationship, we quantify a coach's ability to create trust connections with the people on their team. We objectively quantify their ability to create psychologically safe environments. That comprises trust. In the order theme, we look at their ability to communicate and their ability to have structure or disciplines within their team. And then lastly, in that complexity theme, we quantify their ability to develop the skill sets of the people on their teams and challenge them. So when we have that information, and it's different on every single leader, then the real work begins. And the real work has to be around we do individual coaching, but most of our work revolves around team coaching.
Mhm.
So it's leadership teams within organizations is how we do our work, and which is that's challenging in and of itself because people within those teams have different tenures, they have different skills. So we have to be able to work with the teams, but then we have to be um, able to present really unique learning paths for each individual because everybody learns at a different pace, everybody grows at a different pace, and everybody's skills are different. So
Yeah.
that's typically how we do it. And then it's just a rinse repeat because if you don't come back and do it again, you never know whether you're growing. And as you know, Clint, in leadership and coaching, there is no destination. There's no point at which a leader says, "Hey, you know what? I'm great. I'm done. I don't need to learn anymore. I'm good where I am." Doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's the journey you've got to embrace. I mean, you hear like the great athletes over the years talk about like Michael Jordan and Kobe. They say like, man, it's just the journey. It's not
Right.
really like the end goal is to be the greatest ever of all time. It's the journey of how do you get there, right? And
That's
I
right.
think that's really interesting to think about from a business perspective, from a leader perspective, about the journey and embracing that journey and understanding that it never ends and you're constantly learning. And there's kind of like it's sobering, I think, when you first realize, like, hey, this is never going to end. I'm never going to become a master of this. But it's also like kind of beautiful, right? It kind of takes some pressure off. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
just keep
and the
going.
way you just worded that, I'm going to steal if it's okay with you.
Of
That
course.
you said it's beautiful.
Yeah.
It is, and those things, it's. But I got to tell you, Clint, it's tough when you're in a leadership role and you get feedback and you learn that um, only 60% of the people on your team think that you have a connection with them. that
Right.
only 50% believe you've created a psychologically safe environment. Those are hard things to learn. And those are hard about yourself. But to use your word, it's a beautiful thing to understand because then I know what to do. I know how I know where to focus. If I want to grow as a leader, I know what to do next. And without data, I don't have that ability.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to go deep on each one of these topics. So relationship, and you said within that is create trust.
Mhm.
That's an interesting, like, trust is something that it feels like we've lost, right? In a lot of ways in society. Maybe it was starting around 2015, 2014. I don't know what it is, but it seems like within our institutions, within our leaders, generally we're losing a lot of trust. So how does someone go about gaining trust?
You know, so not to be combative on that, but our data doesn't show the workplace has lost trust,
Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah.
except post COVID.
Okay.
Um, I believe so. What we've seen post COVID is a lot of leaders not doing activities that create trust, that create a connection. Things like one-on-one meetings. You know, post COVID, one-on-one meetings that leaders hold with the people on their teams fell by 54%. So we didn't see it going down. We saw in probably a lot of the organizations with whom we work, you know, once they realize the importance of it, once they can see its impact on the bottom line,
Yeah.
they tend to act on it. But so there's a couple. If I remember, a question was around how they created. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. How do you create trust?
Um, well, let me start off by saying I can't. We can't teach people how to care, Clint,
Right.
but we can teach them to show that they care. And again, whether it's in business, sports, or education, we work in all of those markets now. Are you doing one-on-one meetings with people? Are you asking about their life outside of work? Do you take the time to really get to know somebody, to know the name of their kids, their dog, their pets, whatever that may be? Do you know what their goals are professionally and personally? Because one of the number two motivator in the workplace is that my manager knows my professional goals and helps me work towards accomplishing them. And if you don't know
Mm.
what those are, how can you help them achieve it? Uh, so there's a series of very intentional goal setting, individual goal setting. There's a series of very intentional activities that leaders and coaches need to execute to create that trust and create those connections.
Yeah, that is super, super interesting. If you don't know what their goals are, how are you gonna help them achieve them? That was like the big takeaway from that for me was, yeah, if you don't know what your team's goals are and the people that you're working with, that's impossible. You're just guessing at that point.
Right. And so many people's goals, both professionally and personally, are inextricably linked. You can't, maybe on paper you can separate them, but they're tied together. And so
Mhm.
people say, well, I don't crawl into their personal lives. Well, you better start, because if you don't, those people are going to leave. I'll go hire them from you. I made a
Yeah.
career in one of my early jobs in when I was in a sales leadership role, robbing people from other companies who had no relationship with their boss.
Yeah. That makes it easy to pick them off for sure. I wonder, like, and maybe this follows into what you're saying is like, in order to create trust, you also say like, hey, we try to create a psychologically safe space. Um, is that kind of the same thing, or how are those two different?
Well, so if first of all, trust, I think again, I think they're inextricably linked,
Yeah.
Clint, but they are separate, and they're separate measurably. They're separate. Um, so, do I feel safe being my authentic self? Do I feel safe sharing my thoughts, my attitudes, my opinions? Do I feel safe asking questions? Do I feel safe making decisions within boundaries, but making decisions where I'm not going to be impugned if it doesn't work out exactly right? So that's a kind of a simplistic way to measure or to understand how psychologically safe one feels. And those two together really define that relationship theme that we measure. And and it is quite literally foundational to the growth and performance of every team. And this is interesting too. You asked the question, my mind starts to wander.
No, yeah.
Um, but if you ask any executive in business, and that's probably not true but 99 out of 100, so 99%. And if you ask them a question, does the performance of your teams within your organization, do they reflect how well those teams are coached or led? 99 out of 100 executives will say, absolutely, Bill, they do. As a matter of fact, we used to research it. We quit asking the question because the answer never changed. So they all believe their teams reflect how they're led. But how many of those people have quantified their leadership? Which is an interesting thought, isn't it?
Yeah, that is interesting.
Everybody looks at outcomes. Are they hitting objectives? Are they hitting goals? Which are great. Outcomes you should measure. You should look at outcomes. But what's the input? What's the root cause that creates the outcome? And the biggest root cause that we see in business is the behaviors of leaders. And nobody is really quantifying and helping them evolve in a real way.
Yeah, I want to keep going through your different pillars here, but I want to back up just a bit on you personally and allow you to kind of like talk about your career, how you got started, and what led you to build Ecsell Institute.
Well, if you listen to my TED Talk, you'll know why it got started, which is
It's
I
a
got
great
fired
talk.
from a
Highly
job.
recommend people go watch it.
It's called Why Comfort Will Ruin Your Life. And it's really the story of, and the people that are probably listening to this are going, yeah, Bill, I see why you got fired. But I start off sharing the story of I was an executive working in a publicly traded company, and they did a reorg, and I was not in. And this first time in my life, I'd probably ever been not in terms of advancement and continuing to grow. And that was a game changer for me. Retrospectively, I can see why I wasn't in. You know, I probably at times wasn't a really good employee. I don't like being told what to do. I like to be given a goal and then get out of my way so I can go get it. And sometimes that doesn't work well, depending on the political environment within an organization. But it was at getting fired where I told myself not long after when I was being recruited by another organization, another large organization. I came home one evening and I said to my wife, I said, you know, I'm not going to do that. We're going to roll the dice and we're going to gamble on me, because I will never get fired again, because I'm never going to work for anyone else again. So that was, you know, I don't think there's a single defining moment in our lives, but that certainly was a defining moment in my life at that point.
Is that when you started Ecsell Institute?
Yeah. So I was fired in January of 2008. In July of 2008, the articles of incorporation were signed.
Oh, that's great. And what was the idea? Actually, we have a question here, which I think goes along with this perfectly. From the great Josh Akins, he says, "Why do you focus on teams instead of individuals? Is it just economy of scale? Individuals can't pay enough to make it worth it?"
Really good question, Josh. We do focus on individuals, but individuals are what make up a team. So we have to get feedback. We have to be able to quantify. Everybody should have a voice into helping their leaders understand what's going to get the most out of them. So we do have to hyper individualize it. But then we have to make the coach of that team or the leader of that team understand that you own the output of that team. If that makes sense. Everything that comes out, everything that team produces, whether they hit goal, they miss goal, you have to own it. We used to hear a lot, well, they're a great coach, they just don't have good talent. Well, who's in charge of the talent? You can't blame that. I've never known a great coach that wasn't a great motivator, wasn't a great planner, wasn't a great strategist, a great identifier and acquirer of talent. So we don't focus just on teams. We use teams to measure outcome, but we have to start with the individual.
Yeah. And what had you branch out into other industries? I assume you probably started in sales and business with Ecsell Institute.
It's exactly right, Clint. Well done. Yeah, we started in sales because that was my background. And they're so easy to measure. Yeah. You can always quantify changes to numbers because everybody in sales tracks the numbers. And in our book, that's titled The Coaching Effect. We talk about that in there, and we talk about how we began in sales, and we were able to then correlate and find relationships between activities and behaviors that leaders and coaches are doing that produce better results or worse results. And then that went from sales to, just kind of naturally transition where people in marketing would say, well, hey, if it works for sales, why wouldn't it work here? And operations and IT, then we started being approached by those leaders who are also wanting to quantify their impact. Mm-hmm. And then it went from also across all disciplines in business. We worked in pharma, we work in agriculture, manufacturing, high tech, retail, on and on and on. And then it went into sports. People in sports saying, okay, well, if you could do this in business, you should be able to quantify it in athletics. And so now we have a sports division, and then we have an education division. So we can quantify the impact a coach has on athletes, and we can quantify the impact teachers have on students in the classroom, so on and so forth.
How is the sports one working out? Because that's another one, like you said, like that's measurable. You can tell in like wins and losses, improvement, statistics, that type. Nothing's measured more than sports. But how do you get that out of a coach? How do you change, a coach's mindset so that they're getting better performance out of their players? That's interesting.
Okay, so boy, how long do we have, Clint? So here's what's interesting. In the world of sports, we work only with student athletes. So collegiate level down to middle school level, and everywhere in between. And what was most important, so we did focus groups, and we did our research before we got into the market. We were asked to get into it, but then we still had to do our due diligence. And what we found, guess what was most important when we sat down with high school athletic directors and coaches? Guess what was most important to them?
I would have no idea.
Take a stab?
Like fake IDs? I don't know.
No. What was, wow, okay, that was good. What was most, I'll have to cut that piece out or leave it in. I'm sure what you want to do. Clint, what was most important to both athletic directors and coaches, believe it or not, wasn't winning.
Oh,
it was making sure their coaches provided the best experience possible for their student athletes. That was it. Winning was down the list further. All they wanted to talk about was providing a positive experience. They wanted to talk about making sure they put good citizens out there. They wanted to talk about the percentage of their students that matriculated into college. They wanted to talk about how they just had good citizens in their community and leaders and developing those people. Even coaches didn't want to talk that much about winning. It's not they said nothing, but they said, yeah, of course winning's important to us. But one of the things that we see a lot of coaches, especially what we consider really good coaches, believe, if they do all the other things right, if they provide the best, most positive experience, if they create the strongest relationships, we measure the same things in business that we do sports. If they do the same things, create the connections, provide psychologically safe environments, have great communication, have really solid, healthy disciplines and practice, that they develop their skills and they create a challenging, uncomfortable environment, the result of that is wins. So if you focus, again, what's the root cause, not the outcome?
Right.
And so it's those things that coaches and athletic directors thought was way more important than winning. And winning was just the result of those other things.
I see you have Walter Isaacson's Steve Jobs book behind you, and I wonder, like, that's a leader who had a very interesting style, right? Very hard nosed. He's known as like having kind of a short temper, short fuse. And I think a lot of people, when that book came out, felt like, well, this is how I have to be as a leader. Mm-hmm. But it's not authentic, right? Because that's authentic to Steve Jobs, like berating people in a meeting. If that's not authentically you, by the way, you probably shouldn't do that anyways, but if that's not authentically you, like it was for Steve Jobs, how do you mimic it or pretend like it is, right? And so I wonder if you think about, like, what great leaders do you point to, and maybe Steve is one of them, who really exemplify great leadership?
Most of the people you wouldn't even know, because they're people working within organizations or athletic teams that nobody's heard of.
Yeah.
When I think of a gentleman in Iowa that owns a medical equipment supplier, or I don't want to use the word franchise, but a distributorship.
Yeah.
He is one of the more profoundly impactful people I've met, but nobody's going to know about him except the people that work for him. And those people would sit in a foxhole with this guy. The retired chief commercial officer of a pharma company, where she worked her way up through sales and then sales leadership roles, and then becomes president of a pharma company, and then chief commercial officer of an even larger pharma company and a divisional president. Nobody knows about her except the people that work there. So there aren't people, the Steve Jobs of the world get to be where they are through some pretty radical behaviors. Mm-hmm. And they have some pretty radical, extreme talents that are the result of or driven by these radical behaviors. Steve's stuff worked, but you know what? So did Bobby Knight's at Indiana for a while.
Yeah, that's true.
There's always going to be outliers to work or any research. There's always outliers. And I consider Steve Jobs one of those outliers. Steve was from what I can understand, he was his authentic self.
Yeah.
And then there might be markets, there could be timing, there could be a lot of other things and other players. You look at Phil Knight, whom I have a ton of respect for. And Phil did it uniquely. He wasn't as Steve Jobs, but he was very vulnerable in his book and talks about the lack of relationships sometimes, lack of help that he provided people on his team. And while some of that is good and healthy, at other times, it's not. So there's different ways people can go about it when you have really, really extreme talents. But the day in, day out leader, the ones really, when you go back and say, hey, I wouldn't be where I'm at today, Clint, without this person in my life. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be where I am without that person's guidance and tutoring and mentorship, whatever you want to call it. Usually we only have one or two of those. And those are the people that we probably hear the least about.
Yeah, I think that's true. The best leaders that I've ever met are unknowns. You know,
Right.
like who have been incredible or had a huge impact on my life. That's actually really fascinating to think about. What had you write a book, The Coaching Effect? And by the way, I recommend everybody go pick it up and read it. It's really quite the book. What had you do it? How long did it take? What was the motivation there? Do you have to have a book if you're a coach?
What's that?
Do you have to have a book in your industry if you're going to have an Ecsell Institute, or what was the purpose behind it?
No, you don't have to have a book. They actually, it was some very wise, influential people with whom we were working that said, you know what, Bill and Sarah's president of our companies. They said, you guys need to write a book. You have so much information. You have so much data. You have, everything we do is based on research. They said, you have so much of it. You got to share it with the world. Don't hide it. Don't sit on it. You got to share it. People need to hear it. So that was the driver of the book. And there's really some interesting stories as to how it was created. I'll try to shorten a couple of them because I think it's worth it. One of them is tied into the book and why it's created. But we promote what we call having career development discussions. As a matter of fact, our research shows that's one of those activities that really high performing leaders need to do. And so I was having a conversation with Sarah, and she wasn't president of our company at the time, but about her dreams, her future. We were just in one of those, let's talk, forget everything we've done. Let's just talk about you and dreams, and we started to dream together. And she said, one thing I really want to do is I'd really like to either author or co-author a book sometime. She goes, and she came from, parents were educators and those things were important to her. So I kind of took a note of that. And about a year later, it was during the holidays, I started to do my due diligence into writing a book. So I had people say you should do it. And now Sarah said it was one of her objectives. So I started talking to authors or people that had written books. And it really kind of, after multiple conversations, they had kind of steered me towards this one publishing company. And then, of course, you read all the things like you better have 10 of them because you're going to get turned down.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I may as well get started. And I didn't tell Sarah. So I took some of our work, and we had written a lot of things together. And so I took some of our work and I forwarded it off without letting her know. And got a word back from the publisher saying, hey, we get about 200 submissions a month, and we kind of weed it down to 10. And then we weed it down to 2 or 3 to really work with these specific people. And so, but you made our top 10 list, and now it's going to go to editorial review. We'll get back to you. And so I thought, do I tell Sarah? And I thought, nah, we're not going to make it, So I sat on it. And then about a month or 2 months later, I got an email from him saying, hey, you're in.
Oh, wow.
So I'll never forget, we were at a meeting, and I got that email, and I thought, oh my gosh. So I just handed her my computer. I said, here, read this. She's like, what? Are you kidding me? So that's how we got our publishing done. And then what was really interesting, so we signed that contract, and then I got accepted to do a TED Talk shortly thereafter. And the TED Talk had a much more finite ending.
Right.
And so I was sitting on both these things, like you can't screw one of you. So you gotta, you can't do this at both at the same time. I'm probably doing well. So the book went on hold for just a little bit. Publisher was great with it. They're wonderful people. And then I went into did the TED Talk, got that done, which is really good because what happened as a result of the TED Talk, because the talk went viral, and it really changed how our book was written because of the success of that first TED Talk.
Oh, that's interesting. From the feedback and overall the way it was received, it kind of made its way into the book.
Yeah. So in the TED Talk, I introduced to the world this research we've done on what we call the growth rings. And it just took off. I mean, I was getting reached out from people all over the world about these growth earnings. So Sarah and I are thinking, okay, we got to be able to help people understand how those tie into our coaching and leadership work. So we dedicated the entire first chapter to the growth earnings, which we weren't going to do before.
Oh, interesting. That's very cool. And what's it been like being a public, like once you published it? I mean, how do you market these things? Do you go on like a tour? I'm super fascinated with people who write these super successful books like you.
I think it's a flattering question. It's very, almost get embarrassed and I get emotional talking about this. It's so humbling. I came from a family who I have two brothers, both of whom are gifted writers. And between you and me and now whoever listens to this podcast, Clint, I failed 7th grade English.
That's great.
I despised writing. I hated writing. And what I think I've since come to learn is I didn't despise writing. I despised how teachers forced me to write. And so when I finally, my brothers are still gifted and better writers than I am still today. But anyway, when the book came out, we didn't do a tour, but we did a big marketing tour. So we didn't travel. We did a local thing and had a book party and a signing party. And so we did that. And then we hired people to market the book and help us make it bigger, better. But it was, there's a few things I've done in my life that, which I still think is in there. My father, bless his heart, in his last years, I was written up or had something published. I can't remember. I think in Forbes. And then my TED Talk, I was mentioned in Inc. magazine. Was talked about. I was acknowledged in Inc. magazine. And my dad would, in his care facility when he was, in the assisted living, he'd walk around with the magazine and tell people about it, but he never really talked about the book. It's like, Dad, I wrote a book with Sarah. I mean, we got this book, and he all he wanted to talk about, my son was in Forbes or Inc. or whatever it
was. Well, now you can tell your family you're on CEO.com. I don't know how they'd carry this thing around to show everybody.
They're going to listen to it now.
Yeah. Tell me more about Ecsell Institute and kind of like the growth of the firm and the overall model and where you see leadership in the age of AI, for example. That's the hot topic of the day, of the month, of the year, probably for the next 5 years, is how AI is kind of changing everything. How does Ecsell Institute fit into all of that?
It's a good question. So we're fitting in several different ways. Number one, through diversification, by taking our work into the world of sports and the world of education to understand the human dynamic of the coach-student-athlete relationship, the human dynamic of the teacher-student relationship, the human dynamic of principals and superintendents to teachers. So it's reaching way beyond the business world. In terms of AI, I have not done a ton of due diligence into that. But every time and keep in mind, we view science, Clint, as the inability to disprove. So we're constantly trying to disprove our work. And our work has evolved because we're constantly looking to disprove it. We find things that, hey, they're just not as pertinent as they used to be. When we correlate things to performance or growth, we find that some of the things we used to measure no longer have a really strong statistical significance to performance. So things do evolve, and we're constantly evolving with it. But one thing that's never changed is the relationship factor, the human dynamic.
Right.
That's never changed. As a matter of fact, it seems to be coming, and I'll have to get together with our research team when we're done, but it seems to be becoming more important especially post-COVID, people are understanding, especially those that had it and it was taken away during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And now it doesn't have to be face-to-face. As a matter of fact, our research shows that the most effective leaders post-COVID are those that are on a hybrid schedule.
Interesting.
2 or
So
3 days office,
yeah,
2 or 3 days home.
interesting.
Second place are those that are fully remote, and last place, in-office leaders in terms of effectiveness. So this, what we're doing, Clint, can work. What doesn't work is eliminating this at all.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be that spot. And I think the way people are being raised and the parents today, it's not going to get any easier.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that the relationship dynamic is going to become, I believe, take on greater role every year. Because here's the deal. If you're not going to treat me this way, and you and I probably the same, right? We had parents that they just sucked it up and did it.
That's right.
Because they had to make sure food got on the table that night.
Mm-hmm.
My kids don't worry about food being put on the table. And so, and I see that with a lot of, and now it's not wrong. It's not right. It just is.
Right. I don't know what happened there.
That's okay.
Looks like we're having a little bit of technical things. Oh, let's just go right there. I have a question for you, Bill. And by the way, we need to have you back on because I think your life story, your energy, your humility, the leaders you've coached is just unbelievable. Your experiences are super fascinating. But I like to end with this question with everybody who comes on, and I'm excited to hear your answer, which is, we believe life is as much about chances given as chances taken, right? We take chances on ourselves. We take chances, throughout our lives, but we also have the opportunity to give a chance, which is pretty beautiful. And I wonder who gave you a chance that sticks out.
Actually, I wrote about him in our book, and I was just at a function a month or so ago celebrating him. His name was Bill. Ironically, in the book, we call him Mitch because the publisher said he can't have your same name. People will get confused. So I use the name Mitch, but Mitch took a chance on me. He took me into he recognized, he thought I had the leadership strengths, and he put me in that role and coached me hard, coached me in a very loving yet challenging way. And a lot of our work at the Ecsell Institute, Ecsell Sports, Ecsell Education, and our in the book are a result of him and then others. But in terms of who took a chance on me, Bill did. But here's one thing I want to add to whoever's listening to this. Will you allow yourself will you put yourself in a position where someone can take a chance on you? Because I think it's just as much our responsibility to get comfortable and to be able to step out there ourselves so people can take a chance on us. And that's probably where I see the biggest hesitation. People will take a chance, but are you willing to allow them to take that chance? And that's where I think people really need to look in the mirror today and say, hey, am I going to put myself out there? Am I, parents, let them fail. Let kids fail. Let yourself fail. But allow somebody to take that chance, because then you might be lucky and get someone like I did who, helped propel me into what I'm able to do today.
That's fascinating. I love that. Like this idea that you have to be open to someone giving you a chance and then taking that chance yourself, which kind of brings it all full circle, which is pretty beautiful. Bill, I highly recommend everybody go read The Coaching Effect. Check out the Ecsell Institute online. I'm sure we'll have you back on again, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on.
Clint, thank you. It's been a treat.
Likewise.